She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. She didn't try to. That was, in fact, the whole point. Nora Finch had spent the better part of 6 years perfecting the art of invisibility. She wore her dark hair in a low bun that said, "Don't notice me." She kept her cardigans in 3 colors: navy, charcoal, forest green, because neutral things didn't attract attention. She arrived at the office 12 minutes early every single morning, brewed her coffee before anyone else got in, and was already 3 invoices deep into the day's work before her employer had finished his first espresso. Her employer. The man she worked for. The man whose name, if spoken in the wrong part of the city, made grown men go very still. Dorian Slade. People in his organization called him the architect. Not because he built anything, at least not anything you could see, but because every move, every acquisition, every quiet takeover of a shipping route or a waterfront permit or a city councilman's loyalty, all of it was engineered with such cold, structural precision that his rivals said it felt less like being beaten and more like watching a building you were standing inside get quietly demolished around you, floor by floor, while you were still in it. Nora called him Mr. Slade, and she kept his books, not the public ones. Those were handled by a very nervous CPA in Midtown named Gerald, who asked no questions and billed triple the market rate for that specific skill. Nora handled the other books, the ones that tracked cash flows across 4 shell companies, 2 LLCs registered in Delaware, and a catering business in South Jersey that had never once catered anything. She tracked payments, flagged inconsistencies, reconciled numbers that were never supposed to exist, and she did it all with the same quiet competence with which she did everything else in her life. She was, by every measurable standard, indispensable. Dorian Slade had never once told her so. She told herself she didn't need him to. She told herself a lot of things. The morning it all came apart started like every other morning. Nora arrived at the row house on Crestline Avenue, the one that looked like a private law firm on the outside and functioned as the operational nerve center of Slade's empire on the inside, at 7:48. She punched the code. She nodded to Felix, the man on the door, who always smelled faintly of cigarettes and never, ever smiled. She made her coffee. She sat down at her desk in the corner of the second-floor office and opened her laptop. By 9, she'd already caught a discrepancy in the wire transfers from the Harbor account. $42,000 moving through in 3 separate increments across a 40-hour window, just small enough to avoid automatic flags, just large enough to matter. She printed the report. She clipped it. She left it in the red folder on Dorian's desk, which was the agreed-upon system for things that needed immediate attention. At 9:15, Dorian walked in. He didn't greet her. He never did, exactly. What he did was glance at her desk as he passed, register that she was already working, and continue into his office with the particular brand of silence that meant the world is exactly as I expect it to be. Some people found this cold. Nora had decided, years ago, that she found it clarifying. She always knew where she stood. She stood outside his peripheral vision. She was fine with that. Or she had been, until about 3 months ago. She couldn't even pinpoint what had changed. Just a slow accumulation of small things. The way he'd looked up when she corrected his assumption about the Whitmore property transfer. Not just acknowledged it, but actually paused, like he was recalibrating something. The way he'd asked, once, with no real context, whether she'd eaten. Because the meeting was going to run past 7. The way his voice got slightly less controlled on the rare occasions someone spoke to her in a way he didn't like. Small things. Probably nothing. She was very good at telling herself things were probably nothing. The Friday it happened. The Friday that divided her life into a clean before and after. She wore her navy cardigan. She finished the quarterly reconciliation by noon, which was 2 days ahead of schedule. She packed her laptop bag. She stood at the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. "You're leaving early." She turned. Dorian was standing in the doorway of his office. One hand braced on the frame, jacket already off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was looking at her with the kind of attention he usually reserved for financial reports he didn't trust. "It's noon," she said. "You usually stay until 3. The work is done." She hesitated. "I have somewhere to be tonight." I wanted time to get ready. Something moved through his expression and was gone. "Somewhere to be," he repeated. "Yes." "Where?" She blinked. In 6 years, he had never once asked her a personal question. "Dinner," she said carefully. "A restaurant. With who?" The question landed in the air between them, like something dropped from a height. She stared at him. He stared back, and his expression hadn't changed at all, which somehow made it worse. "A friend," she said. "Which friend?" "Mr. Slade." Her voice came out very calm. She was proud of that. "Is there something you need before I leave?" A pause, the kind that had weight in it. "No," he said. "Go." She went. His name was Patrick Reeves. The friend, the dinner, the whole reason she'd bought the green dress that had been hanging in her closet for 4 months with the tag still on. Patrick was an accountant too, technically, though he worked in corporate tax law, which was a different universe from Nora's particular professional circumstances. They'd met at a continuing education seminar in the spring. He was nice. He had kind eyes, and he asked follow-up questions when she talked. And he'd texted her 3 times since the seminar to suggest dinner. And each time she'd found a reason to say not yet. She'd finally said yes because it was October and she was 31 years old and nice men with kind eyes didn't grow on trees. The restaurant he'd chosen was called Astoria. It sat on the 3rd floor of a boutique hotel on the Upper East Side. All mahogany paneling and low amber lighting and waiters who moved like ghosts and never seemed to appear until the exact moment you needed them. The kind of place where the bread cost more than her lunch usually did, and where the wine list was longer than some novels she'd read. She was aware, getting out of the cab, that she looked different from how she looked at work. The green dress was fitted and off-shoulder, and cut in a way that made no effort to minimize the parts of her she'd spent most of her 20s trying to minimize. Her hair was down. She'd borrowed her neighbor's good earrings. She felt, walking into that lobby, approximately 40% more visible than she was comfortable with, and also, if she was honest, 60%, something she couldn't quite name. Something like determined, something like I deserve this. Patrick was waiting at the table. He stood when he saw her. His eyes went wide in the best possible way. "Nora," he said. "You look? Wow." "Thank you," she said, and sat down, and felt her shoulders drop about 2 inches from where she'd been holding them. They ordered. They talked. He told her a story about a client who'd tried to claim their golden retriever as a business asset. And she laughed, actually laughed, the real kind that came from somewhere in her chest, and didn't have anything to do with being polite. He asked about her work in the way that people ask, when they've been specifically trained not to pry. Carefully, lightly, like he already understood that some doors weren't for opening. She appreciated that more than she could say. She was halfway through her salmon when she felt it. Not saw. Felt. The way you feel a change in barometric pressure, or the particular quality of silence that descends when something very large enters a room. She looked up. Dorian Slade was standing at the entrance to the dining room. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he was with 2 men she recognized as part of his security rotation. His eyes were moving across the room with the calm, systematic efficiency of a man who was taking inventory, and then they stopped, on her. Nora set down her fork. Dorian's expression did not change. Nothing on his face changed at all. And yet something behind his eyes shifted in a way she had no name for and could not look away from. He said something to the man on his left without breaking eye contact. Then he walked toward her table. Patrick had noticed. He'd turned in his seat, following Nora's gaze, and now he was watching the approach of a large, unhurried man with the expression of someone who has just realized that the pleasant evening they planned has changed categories without warning. Dorian stopped at their table. He looked at Patrick. Patrick looked at him. Then Dorian pulled out the empty chair across from Nora and sat down. "Mr. Slade," Nora said. Her voice was very even. She was very proud of it. "Nora," he said her name like it was a period at the end of a sentence. Then he looked at Patrick. "You're the friend." It wasn't a question. Patrick, to his credit, did not visibly flinch. "Patrick Reeves," he said, and extended his hand. Dorian shook it exactly once. "Dorian Slade." She watched Patrick's face as the name registered. He'd heard it. Of course he had. Anyone who worked in the financial sector in this city had heard it, even if they only knew the above-water version. She saw him recalibrate very quickly to a more careful posture. "I was passing through," Dorian said, which was, Nora noted, an outright lie. Astoria was not on the way to anything Dorian Slade had scheduled tonight. She knew his schedule. She'd looked at it this morning. "I thought I recognized you." Nora said. A waiter appeared. Dorian ordered a scotch without looking at the menu. The waiter evaporated. Patrick cleared his throat. "Do you two work together?" "She works for me," Dorian said. "He means I handle his accounting," Nora said simultaneously. "A beat." "Right," Patrick said. What followed was one of the most remarkable dinners Nora had ever witnessed, in that it was technically a two-person date that had somehow become a three-person standoff. Dorian didn't leave. He didn't pretend he was going to. He sat in the extra chair and he drank his scotch, and he answered Patrick's careful, polite questions with responses that were perfectly civil and somehow deeply unwelcoming. He knew exactly what he was doing. She could see it in the very slight tension around his jaw, the way his fingers stayed loose and deliberate around his glass. He was not happy. The revelation of this was doing something complicated to Nora's internal weather. She tried to focus on Patrick, who was trying very hard, who was being a genuinely good sport about the whole thing, who did not deserve any of this. She asked him about the golden retriever again. He laughed, a little uncertainly. She laughed with him, and when she did, she felt Dorian's attention shift in her direction with the weight and precision of a spotlight. "The salmon's good," she told him, because she needed to say something, and that was what was in front of her. "I'm aware," Dorian said. "I had it the last time I was here." "When were you last here?" Patrick asked. 3 years ago." A pause. "I don't usually come to this part of the city," which meant he'd come here tonight specifically, which meant he'd followed her, which meant... Nora picked up her water glass and took a very long sip. Halfway through what Nora could only describe as the longest dessert course in human history, Dorian's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something in his posture changed. The slight, almost imperceptible shift that she'd learned, over 6 years, meant the situation outside had changed categories. "I have to go," he said. "What a shame," Nora said. He looked at her. For a moment, one very specific, completely unguarded moment, she saw something on his face that she'd never seen there before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't calculation. It was something that looked, improbably, like a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't intended to reach. Then it was gone. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Patrick. "Reeves," he said, a nod. And then to Nora. "I'll see you Monday. You'll see me Monday," she agreed. He left. The two men with him folded out of the shadows where they'd apparently been standing this entire time and followed. Nora watched them go. Then she turned back to Patrick. He was looking at her with an expression that was partly sympathy and partly something she recognized as a man mentally updating a situational assessment. "So," he said. "Your boss." "My employer," she said. "Right." He tilted his head. "Does he do that often?" "Sit at our dinner table uninvited," she considered. "This is actually the first time." Patrick picked up his wine. He took a sip. Then he said, with the careful diplomacy of a man in corporate tax law, "He wasn't there because he was passing through." "No," Nora said. "He wasn't." "Okay." Another sip. "Do you? I mean, is there a thing there? Because it's okay if there is." I'd just appreciate knowing. And Nora, who had spent 6 years telling herself that things were probably nothing, opened her mouth to say absolutely not, and found that the words didn't quite come. I honestly don't know, she said instead. It was the most truthful thing she'd said all evening. Patrick absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was a genuinely kind smile, the smile of a man who had decided to be graceful about something he couldn't control. I think, he said, that you should probably figure that out. Monday morning, 7:48. Code punched. Nod to Felix. Coffee made. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She did not look at Dorian's office. He came in at 9:15. He stopped in the doorway to the room where she worked. She kept her eyes on her screen. The Harbor account, he said. Resolved. The breakdown is in the red folder. Silence. You were wearing green, he said. She looked up. Dorian Slade was standing in his doorway with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who had spent the weekend doing something very uncomfortable with the truth. He wasn't looking at her numbers or her reports or the red folder. He was looking at her. Just her. On Friday, he said. Green dress. I'm aware of what I was wearing, she said. I've never seen you in anything that wasn't. He paused, reconfigured. You looked different. I was off the clock, she said carefully. People look different off the clock. You looked. Another pause. Longer this time. Dorian Slade, who never fumbled for words, was fumbling for words. You looked like yourself, he said finally. Like you actually take up space in the world. Like you're not trying to disappear. The room was very quiet. I try to disappear here, she said. I'm trying to disappear right now. I know. He took a step into the room. I've known for a long time. I let it happen because it was convenient. Because you were. He stopped. Started again. Because I didn't look at you the way I should have. Nora's hands had gone still on her keyboard. You sat down at my dinner table, she said. Yes, without being invited. Yes, you followed me. He didn't deny it. I saw you leave in a dress I'd never seen before to meet a man I'd never heard of, and I got in my car before I'd consciously decided to do it. His jaw moved slightly. I'm not saying it was a reasonable thing to do. It was not a reasonable thing to do. No. He was standing in the middle of the room now, closer than he usually got, close enough that she could see the line of tension across his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man holding himself in restraint. I'm not saying it was about reason. She looked at him for a long moment, 6 years of folders and spreadsheets, and red flags, and quarterly reconciliations, and never once being looked at like this, never once being the thing in the room he couldn't afford to miscalculate. I'm your accountant, she said. I know what you are, Mr. Slade. Dorian, he said. After Friday, I think you can call me Dorian. She thought about Patrick's voice across our candlelit table. I think you should probably figure that out. She thought about the green dress, still hanging on the back of her bathroom door, and how she'd stood in front of her mirror for a long time before she put it on, having a quiet argument with herself about whether she was the kind of woman for whom things like this happened. She looked at Dorian Slade, at the rigid, deliberate, carefully controlled man who had followed her across the city on a Friday night without a plan, who had sat at her table uninvited and been unable to leave, who was standing in her workspace right now saying words she suspected he had never said to anyone. And something in her chest made a decision her brain hadn't quite caught up to yet. There's a problem in the Meridian account, she said. He blinked, just once. 4th line, 2nd column. Someone shifted a transfer date to obscure a shortfall. It's small, but it's intentional. She held up the printout. I flagged it this morning. He crossed the room. He took the paper from her hand. He read it. His face shifted into that particular cold clarity that meant someone was about to have a very bad day, and Nora found, not for the first time, that she did not find this frightening. She found it clarifying. Marsh, he said quietly. That would be my guess. He's been with us 7 years. 7 years, she said. And apparently not enough loyalty to match it. Dorian's mouth curved. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that reminded you of what he was, of the world he'd built and operated in, of the things he was capable of. But his eyes, when they came back to her, were something else entirely. "You're very good at this," he said. "I know. I should have said that before now." "Yes," she said. "You should have." He set down the paper. He didn't move away from her desk. He was close enough now that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the grey beginning at his temples, the specific quality of his attention when it was fully, completely, without any reservation, fixed on her. "Dinner," he said. "This week. Not a working dinner, not a meeting. You're asking me to dinner. I'm telling you I'd like to take you to dinner, and I'm asking whether you're willing." She considered him. The man who had sat across from her every day for 6 years and never quite seen her. The man who had followed her on a Friday night because something in him had refused to do the reasonable thing. The man who was standing at her desk right now with his expensive suit and his cold reputation and his complicated hands, looking at her like she was the most important figure in any ledger he'd ever read. She thought about what it meant to take up space. About green dresses, about deciding you were the kind of woman for whom things happened, instead of the kind of woman who just watched them happen to other people. "Wednesday," she said, "and you're making a reservation this time. Somewhere I've actually chosen." The smile again. Still not warm, exactly, but real in a way she'd never quite seen on him before. "Text me where. I will," she said, and turned back to her laptop, and quietly, deliberately, did not smile until she heard him walk away. He paused in the doorway. She heard it, that slight hitch in his step that meant he'd thought of something, or changed his mind about leaving, or simply wasn't done. "The green dress," he said. She didn't look up. "What about it? Wear it Wednesday." And she did.